San Antonio Spurs, I thought, made a great addition in adding Chris Paul to the roster. Now, again, people rip Chris Paul. Oh, he's got no rings. I can show you a long list of guys who don't have them as well. AI doesn't have a ring. Chuck didn't have a ring. As Shaq likes to remind us. Patrick Ewing doesn't have a ring. Reggie Miller. A lot of greats of the 90s because NJ don't have rings. That's doesn't mean you're not a great player. The ring culture is a bit toxic for my taste. But Chris Paul's going to team up with, I think, a man that we all, not all of us, but the majority of basketball fans, myself being one of them, acknowledge is one of the greatest talents who's ever walked on an NBA floor. And his name is, of course, Victor Wembanyama. He comes from France. He won Rookie of the Year a year ago. Averaged was a 21-point double-double, led the league in blocks. Pretty good for basically a kid walking into the NBA. And now he gets one of the greatest point guards who ever lived. Now, certainly not prime Chris Paul, nowhere near that, but his assist-to-turnover ratio is still low, or better put, excellent. And the thing about Chris Paul that I don't think he gets enough credit on, and I'll go ahead and show the graphic here as it pertains to how much better he makes an organization. And it's across the board. We could show you right here. So this is not the records, because there's some lockout seasons in there. There's some COVID seasons in there, some weird stuff. So we just went on winning percentage. Every team prior to adding Chris Paul, the year before adding Chris Paul, this is their records in terms of teams he's played for. The Hornets, at the time, the New Orleans Hornets won 22% of their games before adding CP3. The Clippers won 39% of their games before adding CP3. The Rockets won 67%. That's excellent, but you'll see they got much better. The Suns won about 46% of their games. The Warriors won 53%, and the Spurs won 26%. Look how that shoots up in every single regard. The Spurs, you see the 3 question marks because we don't know. The Hornets went from winning 22% of their games to winning 46% of their basketball games. The Los Angeles Clippers went from winning 39% of their games prior to adding Chris Paul to 60% of their games. The Rockets went from a already impressive 67% of their games won the year prior. They add Chris Paul. They go from 67% to 79%. The Phoenix Suns go from winning 46% of their games the year prior to adding Chris Paul. When they add Chris Paul, they win 70% and go to the NBA Finals. And the Warriors, while they didn't make the playoffs, for what it's worth, they won 53% of their games prior to adding Chris Paul, won 56% once he joined ship. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. Will the Spurs win 22 games this season? I'm going to go out on a limb and say they win more than that this year. And I'm not saying Chris Paul is going to be the difference between that number of wins and the playoffs, but could the Spurs challenge? Could they get in the play-in tournament and make it difficult on one of those teams, kind of hoping like a Phoenix Suns, for example, like just fighting to get into the Sacramento Kings? I mean, Sacramento got an answer for Wemby, a year 2 Wemby? You kidding me? So, and also the one thing that I don't think anybody's talking about enough with the Chris Paul acquisition, like, oh, Wemby. Yeah, he's going to help Wemby. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, DeAndre Jordan was made a viable NBA player with Chris Paul. Don't believe me? What's DeAndre Jordan done since Lob City? What's he done? It fizzled out in LA, fizzled out in Brooklyn. He was with Dallas for 2 minutes. I think before that, he's Jokic's third string, I guess, in Denver's more there for veteran leadership than anything. I think he was with some teams in between. I think he was with the Sixers for a little bit and was a disaster there. DeAndre Jordan 1 year was first team All-NBA with Chris Paul. DeAndre Jordan. This guy is not Shaq. Let's put Shaq to the side. It's not Embiid. It's not Jokic. It's not Giannis. It's not one of the better bigs in today's NBA. DeAndre Jordan was first team All-NBA 1 year with Chris Paul as his teammate. That's what he does. Where he goes, they improve. But it's not just the Victor Wembanyama thing, because everybody's talking about that, and it's going to be a beautiful, relationship, basketball relationship between those two, because Chris Paul is going to put Victor Wembanyama in positions to get great looks, to score even easier or more effortlessly than he already does. Who did the San Antonio Spurs select with their first-round draft selection? Stephon Castle out of UConn. This is a kid who isn't a great shooter, but is a classic college-style point guard. My guy Mike Guido, shout out to Mike, did a fantastic job during our draft shows last week on the Grid Network. had Stephon Castle mocked in his mock draft, had him going number 2 overall. Obviously, he goes to number 4 at the San Antonio Spurs. And now this kid with this kid who's good character, all this was coached hard at UConn. We understand Dan Hurley runs a very tight ship there. Practices are hard. It's hard in UConn. College basketball is one thing. UConn's a different animal as it pertains to how hard the players are coached. So Popovich won't be that big of an adjustment for Stephon Castle. He gets to go to Pop, a coaching style he's already used to, and Chris Paul is his mentor. Again, nothing against any of the guys the Spurs had prior, but this is Chris Paul. This is not prime Chris Paul. This is not all-star Chris Paul, but still a very impactful player. Again, he played the fewest minutes of his career a season ago, and still had plenty of games last season for my Warriors with double-digit assists. This is a great addition for the San Antonio Spurs. This is an opportunity for them to continue to see the growth for Wemby. And again, I don't think there's any reason, folks, I mean, for what it's worth, they did finish 7-4 down the stretch. For as bad as they were throughout the majority of the season, last 11 games, small sample size, I get it, but the last 11 games, the most recent San Antonio Spurs games we saw, they went 7-4. Wemby looked a little, unsteady at the start of his rookie campaign, but he gave it a few games. It's like, oh boy, here he comes. Yeah, Western Conference, you better start getting your championships before this guy starts to ascend, because heck, Eastern Conference for that matter. Start Boston, go and win a couple more before Wemby comes here and gets the NBA Finals, because then it's gonna be a problem for the whole league. So I think it's a great addition for the Spurs, adding Chris Paul with Victor Wembanyama, and also to his mentorship to Stephon Castle. I think that's gonna be a really, really, really big, sort of addition for the Clippers, not just from a playing standpoint and how he'll help Wemby, but from a leadership standpoint with Wemby and Castle. And here come the Spurs. This is a well-run franchise, has been for a very long time. And yeah, just making the right moves at the right times. That's what San Antonio does. And they're going to be set up in good shape. And in 5-6 years, when the Spurs are NBA champions, Wemby, Castle are going to look back. Chris Paul helped us along the road. Like, that's what, if you look at NBA history, that's what just about every single dynasty has in common. If I just off the top of my head think of guys, they've had a veteran player in there with what was already a young group to help them mature. Andre Iguodala was the guy for the Warriors, right? He signed there in free agency. Now, Iguodala was still an all-star caliber player. He's a different stage of his career then than Chris Paul is now, but he mentored Steph, and he mentored Clay and Draymond and some of the other young guys in Golden State. So, and was a fan favorite with the Warriors, but more importantly, a favorite of Steve Kerr. So, adding veterans to a very young basketball team is very, very important. And I think Chris Paul is going to fit well in San Antonio. And listen, listen. People may scoff at playing, but see what the Spurs have been the last 2 years. They'll take a playing appearance. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.